So Georgi Tenno, he missed his chance to escape in transit because they very deceptively reassured him that things would be okay. And Tenno would make these really intricate escape plans in his mind. And the book points out really well, I can't give all the details, how someone who's a committed escapee would not be experiencing prison life in the same way, because they were always calculating how many steps were they taking, how many locks were on a door, what did the guard put in his pocket, little details like that all the time, and getting a general layout of the landscape, the social and the physical landscape, in order to come up with their escape attempts. And prisoners could spend hours, weeks, days coming up with a plan, and then that could get shot down instantly because something random might happen, or even the weather might change. And some prisons were way more elaborate than others, and so required a lot more thought. Solzhenitsyn mentions that the prison that Tenno was initially in, the Lefortovo prison, wasn't anything like the Lubyanka. Prisoners could also be foolish when almost escaping because they were being rowdy and alerting guards. There's one example of prisoners doing exactly this. One prisoner dresses up as a warden after keeping the warden tied up in the bathroom. But then the prisoners made so much noise that they alerted another place, and a centralized security system was put into place. So it was all for naught because they couldn't just not, I don't know, be more sly or slick about what was happening. Prisoners could try to pretend that they were weak to escape notice, or they could work as a group, but then everyone in the group would have to be resolved and not change their mind and be like up to it. In one example of the weather getting in the way, there was a dust storm that wasn't expected for when an escape was planned. In this example, due to the dust storm being there and causing a commotion and dust, someone was able to escape during routine work. At one point, Tenno considered trying to escape through a sewage truck, but then he decided that the driver wasn't the right person, like in the sewage truck. Tenno also would then pretend to be interested in the cultural and educational center in order to get the guards and the scent off of his back. And committed escapers, those who would attempt and fail over and over again, they were kind of shuttled around from camp to camp. They were driven by their troubled destiny, like quote unquote, in Solji's words, Flying Dutchmen. At Escapee, where Solzhenitsyn was, prisoners were also given special work to reform them, but that only made them want to leave more. They would be told to work in a lime kiln, which got lime all over their eyes and mouths and in their windpipes. And Tenno formulates a plan in the text at that time with the ace driver, I'm not sure what that means, named Kolya Zhdanok. And he was the driver of the lorry that brought in the lime. And he became an involuntary accomplice in the end because another man named Ivan Vorobyov, who couldn't drive, insisted on trying to drive when they were trying to make the escape, well, when Tenno was trying to make the escape happen. And this caused both Tenno and driver to stay behind because they didn't trust this Ivan guy with driving. So it turned out that this Ivan guy could drive, so they got a little far, but then the plan failed just by chance because a prison transport van just happened to be coming by. But since it almost worked, it was repeated by prisoners, but that one failed as well. And at least one prisoner died. So then Georgi Tenno and Kolya Zhdanok, they then decided to come up with another escape plan. And the lime kilns seemed like a really good place to try. But although they wanted to do the lime kilns, there was a professional prisoner, a murderer, who warned them to not escape from his work area, which was the lime kilns, although he himself had attempted to escape. And it's pointed out that this was a mindset of these professional prisoners. So then Tenno and Zhdanok, and I'm going to use their names interchangeably because that's what the book does. So remember both their last name and first name. So Georgi Tenno and Kolya Zhdanok, they tried another plan that involved stealing an electrician's wire cutters, making knives from shovels, and making a really grand scheme where they said they were going to be participating in a play in the cultural and educational center. So they had to be doing this for a long time so that they could be out late and get the guards used to them being out at odd hours, etc. And that also allowed them to map the area. Coincidentally, although my note, there are no coincidences in life, in my opinion, the day of the escape, Sunday, September 17, Tenno received a letter from his mother and a parcel from her. There was another experienced escapee who decided that he was too old to go along and then ended up saying a prayer for them. And then a fellow prisoner who was Tenno's old cellmate from the Lubyanka, right after they all saw the coffin of a man who had been trying to escape before, recently, being carried out, said to them, by picking up the briefcase, which was really important for the actual escape, and playing the part of the interrogator, told them that they shouldn't be trying to escape. So maybe that was a coincidence too, or maybe he actually knew what they were trying and was trying to warn them not to do it. So Tenno and Stanok got ready by just loosening their number patches, and they were depending on the sentry not being so alert at the end of the day when roll call came, because they wouldn't be visible remaining outside. They were going to be playing a card game, I think it is, on the ground, and then when everyone was coming in, it would be too dark to fully see. They also bribed a lorry driver with a half a liter of vodka. That chapter was very interesting to read. Chapter 7, The White Kitten, Georgi, Tenno's tale. So this is the beginning. So he's working with Kolya, Stanok. I am the senior partner, so I must go first. Sheath knife at my belt, wire cutters in my hands. Catch up with me when I cut the boundary wire. I crawl flat on my belly, trying to press myself into the ground. Shall I look towards the sentry or not? If I do, I shall see what danger I'm in, and perhaps even draw his gaze upon me. How I'm tempted to look, but I won't. Nearer to the watchtower, nearer to death. I expect a burst of machine gun fire to hit me. Any minute now I shall hear its chatter. Perhaps he can see me perfectly well, and is standing there laughing at me, letting me scrabble a bit further. Here's the boundary wire. I turn around and lie parallel with it. I cut the first strand. The severed wire twangs as it loses its tautness. Now for the machine gun burst? No. Perhaps no one else could hear that sound, though it was very loud. I cut the second strand, and the third. I swing one leg over, then the other. My trousers catch on the barb of a trailing strand. I free myself. I crawl over several meters of plowed land. There's a rustling behind me. It's Kolya. But why is he making so much noise? Of course, it's the briefcase dragging along the ground. Here are the abutments to the main fence. The wires are crisscrossed. I cut a few of them. Now there's a spiral entanglement. I cut it twice and clear away. Now I cut some strands of the main fence. Are we breathing at all? Probably not. Still, he doesn't shoot. Is he dreaming of home or thinking of the dance tonight? I heave my body over the outer fence. There's yet another barbed wire entanglement. I get caught in it. I cut my way out. I mustn't forget and mustn't get stuck. There must still be the outer sloping barriers ahead. Here they are. I cut them. Now I am crawling towards the hole. Here it is, just where it should be. I lower myself into it. Kolya follows. We pause to get our breath, but we must hurry on. Any minute now, the guard will be relieved and the dogs will be here. We hoist ourselves over the hole and crawl towards the slag heaps. We still can't bring ourselves to look around. In his eagerness to be out of the place, Kolya rises onto all fours. I push him down again. In a leopard crawl, I put the wire cutters under a stone. Here's the road. A little way from it, we got to our feet. No one opens fire. I'm skipping a bit here where they run into someone unexpectedly, and then it's okay, and they tear the numbers off their backs. Have we escaped notice? Are we free? Now to the settlement to find a lorry. But what's that? A flare roars up over the camp. Another one. A third. They found us out! The pursuit will start right away. We must run. No more looking around, no more stopping to think, no more careful calculation or magnificent plan is in ruins. We rush into the steppe to get as far from the camp as we can. We gasp for breath, stumble over bumps in the ground, jump up again, while rocket after rocket shoots up into the sky. Remembering previous escape attempts, we imagine them shortly sending out mounted search parties with dogs on leashes over the steppe in every direction. So we sprinkle all our precious makorka in our tracks and take big jumps. Now we shall have to make a wide detour around the settlement and keep to the steppe. It takes a lot of time and trouble. Kolya begins to doubt whether I am leading him the right way. I am offended. But here is the embankment of the Pavlodar Railway. We are very glad to see it. From the embankment, we are astounded by the widely scattered lights of Ekibastus. It looks bigger than we have ever seen it. We choose ourselves a stick. Holding on to it, we walk along, one on each rail. Once a train goes by, the dogs will be unable to pick up the scent from the rails. We go on like that for about 300 meters, then take a few jumps and into the step. At last, we can breathe. We want to sing and shout. We hug one another. We really are free. How we admire ourselves for resolving to escape, succeeding in doing so, and eluding the dogs. Although the test of our willpower is only just beginning, we feel as though the worst of it were already over. The sky is clear, dark, and full of stars. You never see it like that from the camp because of all the lights. Guided by the pole star, we travel northeast. Later on, we shall veer right and reach the Irtish. We must try to get as far away as possible this first night. I don't really think I can translate this chapter very well because it's so gripping and well done. I really think it should be made into a movie. It's so good, and I was like totally caught up in it. So they escape, and by chance the camp's lighting system had failed, and that allowed the flares to be used, and that let them know that the hunt was on for sure. It turns out that the rest of the prisoners had thought that they had cut up the lighting system, but that's not what had happened. And it hadn't actually helped them. As the sun rises, since night is the only time for escapees, they make a foxhole with their knives, 1/2 meter wide and 30 centimeters deep, and they cover it with prickly yellow steppe gorse. They suffer the heat, they're dying of thirst, and they lie head to toe since any movement of the gorse could alert someone going by on horse. And they fought fleas for 3 days without water, and they stayed in a hole that was previously dug out by a jackal, also barely moving about 1/3 of the way to the Irtish. They scare a Kazakh woman herding sheep. They were trying to get a horse, and after 5 nights without sleep, after finally sleeping by staying in some hay, they try again at night to drink the tractor's cooling water, but it has kerosene in it and they can't drink it. In the past, they might have been able to ask for food, but at that time in the climate, they couldn't ask anybody for help. Solzhenitsyn mentions that the 19th century failed to realize that a gift of bread and water could be a political crime. They finally end up stealing from a Kazakh couple with children who are in a yurt. They initially asked them for help and they pretended to be on a business trip, but the man didn't want to, so they get food, meat, knife, and a drink called kumis. And Tenno chastises the man for not helping him in the first place, and they tell him to remain still and claim that they have friends outside. The horse, once they had him, kept trying to turn back home, and they rode eastward. Kolya sang a song. Out on the ledge where the wind blows free, a cowboy's life is a life for me. With a horse I can trust beneath me. He made up a song, but then they realized that they lost their blanket and that would leave a trail, so they keep riding and they have to abandon the horse because it slipped free and just refused to be tamed, and they finish their water. They see reeds and are excited because they know that there's water, so they might be near the Irtish. After 8 days, their stomach starts working again. I'll read some more here. At a fork in the road, something happened for the first time in 8 days. We quarreled. I said right. Shtanak said left. I felt sure that it should be right, but he wouldn't listen. Another of the dangers that lie in wait for escapers: falling out with one another. When you are on the run, one of your number must be allowed to have the last word, otherwise you are in trouble. Determined to have my way, I went off to the right. I walked 100 meters and still heard no footsteps behind me. My heart ached. We couldn't just part like that. I sat down by a haystack and looked back. Kolya was coming. I hugged him. We walked on side by side as though nothing had happened. So they find the Irtish and they sleep and sleep on the 9th day, and they find a boat that luckily the owner left with oars, and they row in the dark. They see a steamer, and similar to how Solzhenitsyn mentioned this on his transit trip, they see free people who weren't aware of their freedom. They find a calf near a house, kill the calf, but with a lot of trouble on the water. Tenno doesn't want to kill the calf, but he hates the calf for struggling and almost sinking the boat. They stay on this island from the 10th to the 16th days, but then they have to leave because they run into someone. They're eventually able to buy food and supplies and run into the first set of kind people. Tenno is agonized from this problem he has where he can't find a razor to shave, which they will need in order to make it through the train station area. And then they almost get caught because Stanok wants to get warm and Georgi can't deny him, so they stay at a house. And the house ends up calling the owners of the house ends up calling the authorities on them. And then they find another house where the old man was at first suspicious but then kind. And then they run across a man and a wife on a boat leaving with all their belongings. They had passports. This man and the wife would have had passports and a well-needed razor and money and provisions. And Georgi struggles about whether or not to take these things, and they pretend to be part of the MVD, the Special Forces operations. And I'm going to read again. If we took their papers, they would have no choice but to report us. To prevent their doing so, we must tie them up here and now. Tie them up well and truly so that we could have 2 or 3 days head start. But in that case, wouldn't it be better simply to... Kolya came back and signaled that everything was alright up above. He was waiting for me to say, Mac Madeira. What was I to do? The slave camp of Ekibastus rose before my eyes. Could I go back to that? Surely we had the right. And suddenly, something very light touched my legs. I looked down. Something small and white. I bent over. It was a white kitten. It had jumped out of the boat, and with its tail stiff as a stalk in the air, it purred and rubbed itself against my legs. It didn't know what I was thinking. I felt as though the touch of this kitten had sapped my willpower, stretched taut for 20 days ever since I had slipped under the wire. It suddenly seemed to snap. I felt that whatever Kolya might say to me now, I could never take their lives, nor even the money they had earned in the sweat of their brows. So they left the couple alone, who had all the things they needed, but the couple turns out to have been unsympathetic towards them when they had actually seen them earlier, and they would have told on them. They realized that as they were leaving. So they started making mistakes right after the white kitten incident. Something happens with fire, they can't see eye to eye, they lose confidence. Kolya wants to leave and does, but then Georgi follows him, and then they end up being recaptured. Well, Georgi does, and then he pretends to be injured from gunshots, but they beat him up and ask him for his name, and he eventually gives his name. And he describes being rhythmically struck on the face, left, right, as though he were swimming, by an officer, and his head banging against the wall with every blow. He also describes a forester being given the task, which the other officers didn't want to do, of helping him relieve himself because he needed to pee or maybe more, I don't know. And someone had to be there to help him because he couldn't use his hands, and how that was very common. And so he felt like he should describe it, although maybe it wasn't the nicest thing to want to read about. And then with people around, the local people, they were told lies about Georgi and Kolya being murderers, which wasn't true, but the villagers believe in it and shouting obscenities at them. And so he's taken back to prison, Georgi first. And he also describes how on his way back, the floor is jagged and they leave his face lying there, bumping up and down the whole time and cutting up his face, and no one caring for hours, until one person who really stuck out and he doesn't know why has sympathy on him eventually and picks him up and lets him know that they're almost there. And when he got back to the prison, they didn't put him in disciplinary barracks, but put him in the regular cell so that everyone could get a look at him after that interesting travel experience. So Kolya was out there on his own, but because he hadn't been the brains of the operations, he didn't last very long, and he kept making simple mistakes, like keeping a bicycle and gun that he had taken, and then being friendly with an old lady and her daughter who reported him. And they took Kolya's money. They weren't tried until after 9 months, and then they only had 2 more years extra, although they both each got another 25 years. The only real threat was being told that they might be charged as economic disruptors, because that could possibly result in capital punishment. And they would have been economic disruptors because they had brought disorder into the economy of the people's state by doing their escape. So the state spent a bunch of money trying to recapture them, and then work wasn't really happening while they were gone for a couple of days. And it also turns out that there had been a nationwide search, and 400 pictures of him, Tenno, and Stanok had been plastered everywhere. So Georgi Tenno died on October 22, 1967 of cancer, but he did see these writings and helped with editing them. Okay, so that's my recounting of this tale of the white kitten. and I couldn't believe that they didn't make it. I totally thought they were going to make it, and I was really sad when they didn't. And when both of them ended up not making it, I was like, really felt it. So as you can tell, this part of the book, I don't know, I think it should be like a movie. I mean, there's still a bit more. So, and like, if you really imagine this, it's awful. Like, it's really awful. And also the term Mac Madeira, that's what they would say when they realized there was no point in asking someone for help. Like, they tried, they would have to take it by force anyhow.